Welcome to today's program. Our guest, Norman Ball. He's a local writer with more than 300 published articles, essays, poems, and songs. A Pushcart Prize nominee, his work appears regularly on eScene's Best of the Literary Journals. He's an associate political editor of Potomac Magazine. A book collection of his essays, What Can We Do to Make Your Power More Comfortable, will be out next year from Del Sol Press. Norm is a graduate of Washington and Lee and George Washington Universities. A more extensive resume of his activities can be found at our Point Taken website. Today's topic, is there a culture war? Is there such a thing? If so, who started it and why? If you care about this kind of a topic, and if you care about what kind of a political system we use to run our country, you won't want to miss today's program. I'm Leo Gerard. Point Taken. Welcome back. Tell you what really started me thinking about this was wondering if America was on its way to becoming a failed state. Now that's a particular kind of political reference. A failed state is a state in collapse. Normally we talk about places in Africa. Nothing in the government works. But that is an absolute, and I'm not a big fan of that kind of a definition of anything. I prefer operational definitions. And in this context, it would mean, is America a failed state? Is America doing everything that America can do to live up to be everything that America can? Not how do we stack up compared to Libya or Nairobi or something like that. The question in my mind is, are we becoming a failed state because we cannot both protect the entire country in terms of the Department of Defense and yet at the same time provide some kind of national health care system? I don't want to even get into, well, should it be the government actually providing health care or just running the system in some way? And what this led me to thinking about is we can't even seem to discuss this sort of thing because of what Pat Buchanan called a culture war. The more I started thinking about the culture war, the more I realized I couldn't really get a handle on it. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, who was involved in it, who started it. And I certainly wasn't happy about being involved in it. I wasn't even sure if I was. And if I am, I want to tell the people that started it, I resent being drafted. This led me to talk to my friend Norman Ball. As I mentioned, he is a well-respected author. And we started talking about the culture war. My friend Norman. Norm, welcome to today's program.
Thanks for having me, Leo.
Norman, what do you think? Is there a culture war?
No.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for showing up.
Yes.
Leo, we have talked about this, and I did some research on the term itself, culture war. It goes back to the 30s.
So nothing new again.
The 1930s, everything, nothing changes, everything stays the same. In fact, it was coined in the 30s by Antonio Gramsci, who was the Italian socialist communist in Mussolini, Italy. And he used it in an entirely different context, but it was basically he himself expressing his impatience with the Marxist revolution that never seemed to arrive. And then the term itself kind of disappeared out of the lexicon for a large period of time. Then in 1991, there was a book by James Davidson Hunter called Culture Wars, A Struggle to Define America.
Yes.
And what Mr. Hunter posed was that there was, in fact, a polarized nation here in the United States between what he called the traditionalists and the progressives.
Now, how does he come to that conclusion that such a thing, in fact, exists? Is there a footnote that says, and
Well,
the reason I know this is?
Here's a fascinating thing. You know, the rhetoric of polarization, to a large degree, creates the phenomenon of polarization. I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think
So the answer to my question is there's no real, what we would call scientific evidence that says X number of people are on the verge of taking up arms, and that's how we know an outbreak of civil war is imminent.
Yeah.
It's just, I said so.
Well, on the contrary, I would say the vast majority of Americans are unaffiliated with the culture war. There's been studies that show about 5 to 8% of the American population are what you would call culture warriors or political activists. And these are the people on both sides of the spectrum who, for a variety of personal reasons, champion social causes on either side. On the contrary, the vast majority of Americans are what Richard Nixon called the silent majority, or what others have called the malleable middle, or the serviceable middle.
So this culture war business is an artifact and maybe even an invention of the 2% out in the tail on the left and the 2% out in the tail on the right?
I think because they're so vocal and so passionate about a variety of not widely held social beliefs, and prayer in school, abortion, pro and con, government financing of the arts. There's a range of issues, the green and radical environmentalism. And these people get exercised, and they pull the to their credit as Americans, they pull the levers of power. And I think they dictate and control the cultural language and landscape. And before you know it, the center, which is where most Americans are, the center finds itself cast into these different frames, these right-wing.
So this is the phenomena again. If you can frame the question, you basically control the debate and the intensity of the debate for quite some time, possibly well into an election, and which more and more seems to be about gaining power, not providing service to your fellow constituents.
I would tend to agree with that, yeah. If I could just for a minute,
Please.
Going from 1991, the Hunter book, the speech, probably the most partisan, demagogic speech given in the United States in the last 30 years was the Pat Buchanan 1992 Republican National Convention speech. In fact, it's now called the Culture War speech.
Right.
Where, and I'm going to go on a limb and say that Mr. Buchanan read the Hunter book, because that very next year at the convention, he gave voice to the fact that there is a war for the soul of America.
So he either was operating as a political operative and said, now here's something we can hang our hat on, or, and it is possible, he believes this. It is possible.
Well, he's demagoguing, and I don't deny, nor do I frankly know, the sincerity of his beliefs, but he certainly put the political rhetoric to the notion of it, and used very stark inciting language. We called it a religious war. I mean, this is like this is crusade.
This is crusade, right?
The War of the Roses
in America.
Absolutely.
Crusade in America.
And again, I think language, to a large degree, can control a debate, and can certainly it certainly defines the terms, and therefore there certainly is there's a self-fulfilling. I'm not saying that there aren't passionate beliefs out there in the United States. Obviously there are, but those that wield the language and have the microphones and have the inclination to involve themselves in the political machinery are obviously going to further their agenda.
They really do. I mean, and that's and very often it's to their credit. After all, there was a lady who discovered the Love Canal, and she wasn't really a professional, but there's another example, though. But in that example, it seems to me it was to a good cause. A citizen became a citizen activist and affected a good. This, I'm not sure, has the wherewithal, or it's driving itself in a good direction. I am concerned that while it starts off as something that someone genuinely believes in, let's say Pat Buchanan, 10 years later, it's not about the intellectual analysis anymore. People are getting guns. They are so furious about whatever the issue is at a time when the abortion versus right to lifers, there were people who called themselves right to lifers were arming themselves and firing handguns at physicians, at healthcare centers, because they believed that their right to life was more sanctimonious or sanctified, I guess is the right word, than somebody else's right to life. It seems to me we went to this extreme once already in the 1860s, and we ended up with more dead Americans than ever before in history. And fundamentally, it would seem that we proved nothing other than if you can get cranked up enough, things get out of control.
Well, I think the rhetoric can, the brush fire can get away from you, and you create a conflagration in the country. The rhetoric can certainly set fire and go beyond the political designs of those who wield the language. And sure enough, you can, before you know it, the population could very well adopt the rhetoric and thereby make the rhetoric reality. There was another contrary position, Leo, by Morris Fiorina, in his book, Culture War, the Myth of a Polarized America. He demythologizes this Hunter thesis that was carried by Buchanan to great effect. He says, and on the contrary, there's two things happening in America. Since the 60s, the political apparatus for both parties has radicalized, but in that same period, the average American across demographics, there's a remarkable converging of beliefs across gender, race, ethnicity, religious belief.
We are now in an era when no matter what happens, a black man could be the president of the United States as we speak, and yet we have a red state, blue state map that he is competing in. I mean, that seems a bit ironic.
Well, and what is the blue and red? It's a color wheel that's been imposed by the powers that be to divide the nation into two camps. You know, what is the veracity of red and blue? What's the veracity, frankly, of soccer moms and other demographic shorthand designations? These are like magazine handles. This is what fills magazines. You know, the Generation X, the Boomers, the Generation Y, everybody's a generation. This is what you wear, this is what you believe, and it certainly serves the powers that be, and I think it does a disservice
to... Let me ask about that, because it seems to me that the powers that be, in this case, people who want at least the perception of a culture war, feel that somehow they're being ill-served. They've been involved in this culture war for at least, 72? And they are winning, or up until now at least, they have won the political fight. They control the presidency, the Senate, Congress, the majority of the state governorships, as well as many state houses, and yet they're losing on those issues that the culture war is about.
Well, that's interesting. That is a refrain that you hear from the conservative side, that they have achieved their political objectives, and yet they're losing the culture battle nonetheless.
Right.
Which begs the question as to how does a political system necessarily animate a culture, or can it lead a culture, or bring a culture back from some excess as someone perceives
it? But is
it.
the excess that culture war seems to want us to come back from is the excess of accommodation, progressiveness, not in the political sense of a liberal, but get along, go along. More people have more things, more stuff than ever before in history. We have a country, I have never found this before, who has obesity as a problem. A country that suffers from excess food, that's got to be the first time in the history of the planet. Why do we want to have ourselves constantly feel exercised about something when we seem to be at the pinnacle of, not since the golden age of Greece possibly, except for this culture war rhetoric kind of thing?
Well, I think the rhetoric is an overlay, and I suppose it works to some degree. It does get people exercised and makes them think about their where they stand on social issues. There was a time, and I go back to FDR, a more pragmatic centrist time, and it is a political movement called the radical center now, where people of
The radical center?
the radical center. This is an attempt to meet in volume the fringes on the right and the left. Instead of being the soft, squishy middle, hey, we have beliefs too. We may be centrist. That doesn't mean we're boring and lack for passion. So
we just don't think we should scream and demand everything, every thought that comes into our head needs to go up on a bumper sticker.
Maybe on the contrary, we need to scream a little louder in the middle to match the volume of both fringes. But one thing that radical centrism, one of its main tenets is a social reticence. Let's leave the social issues. Let's remove them again from the political debate, because it is the right and the left who champion the social issues.
And they champion it at the fringes. The radical center, that is a fascinating topic. We're going to take a quick 30-second break here, and then we'll come back and talk further with Norm. Thank you.
Just 1 hour of your time can help. At Inova Blood Donor Services, a not-for-profit organization, we supply blood to patients at 15 different hospitals in our community. That means we need to collect over 200 pints of blood every day. And yet less than 5% of the people in our community donate their blood. Too many feel they just don't have the time. But with 4 donor centers in the region and blood drives at libraries, community centers, shopping malls, or even the workplace, it's never been faster or easier. Contact us at 1-866-BLOOD-SAVES or on the web at www.inova.org/donateblood to find out how and where you can help. Because just 1 hour of your time could help save up to 3 lives. So please, give blood, the gift of life, at Inova Blood Donor Services.
Welcome back. When we left, we had just started to discuss with Norm something called the Radical Center. Sounds fascinating. Norm, tell us about the Radical Center.
Well, the Radical Center is a movement that sprung up in a sense that the middle is being underrepresented and is being shouted down by the fringes on both sides of the debate.
So even if the middle statistically consists of at least 66%,
Richard Nixon called it the silent majority. These are people that don't have a particular axe to grind. They go to work. They don't have burning issues, whether it be gay marriage or environmental regulation or the lack thereof.
they have lives to live.
They have lives, and they don't particularly feel obliged to get overly. It tends to be the people with burning issues, I guess, that gravitate towards the levers of both parties. And, Michael Lind is a gentleman who has given voice to the Radical Center, and he traces it back to a lineage that includes FDR. It's a proud tradition in America. And I think its animating principle, I would say, is pragmatism, good old American pragmatism, not ideology, not doctrinaire. Are we on the right page? Are we still consistent with our ideologies? FDR was, if in one way, was noted for his ability to try things, and if they didn't work, he discarded them.
I think there's something that's different about today's organizations, whether they're purely political, is that once committed to something, even if it accomplishes its task, it has solved the problem, we continue to do it anyway.
Right.
And if it doesn't work, that's okay, we continue to do it anyway.
Right.
So that's, it sounds to me you're saying that FDR was more concerned with results than first asking himself, what would Milton Friedman think? What would Karl Marx think?
Well, he came from an old patrician Eastern establishment family, and he certainly dabbled with the WPA and Tennessee Valley Authority, dabbled in socialism, for lack of a better word.
Well, it was George Will tells us that all forms of the government doing anything is some form of socialism.
Yeah.
It just is. So
It's a matter of degree.
it's a matter of degree. And outcome, I would think, too. There's nobody that I know is out in the street with a sign saying, shut down the TVA.
Exactly.
It works.
And there's no libertarians in a FEMA crisis. I mean, if your house is leveled, I think, I haven't met I'd like to. I mean, if there is such a person who decides not to pursue government assistance on the basis of his principles.
You
That's
find that there are no libertarians in bankruptcy court either.
Yeah.
I take your meaning.
Or atheists in the foxhole. You know,
That's right.
it becomes kind of circumstantial to some degree.
It does.
But I have a quote for you, Leo.
Please.
And I'll ask you, maybe you can guess who said this. And I'm even more angry as a legislator who must endure the threats of every religious group who thinks it has some God-granted right to control my vote in every roll call in the Senate. I will fight them every step of the way if they try to dictate their moral convictions to all Americans in the name of quote-unquote conservatism. And I'll tell you first of all who it wasn't. It was not Abby Hoffman. Well, he wasn't a senator. Nor was it George McGovern. And it certainly wasn't Vladimir Ilyich Lenin either. So those three...
But is it somebody other than United States Senate, like Barry Lynn, the lefty for People for the American Way?
It's not even a lefty. It was
Really?
Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater.
The father of the modern conservative movement.
And you could argue that Reaganism destroyed Goldwater conservatism, because it was in the Reagan era that the three major socio-religious political organizations came of age. That was the Moral Majority of Jerry Falwell, Focus on the Family, Dr. Dobson, and Pat Robertson's Christian Coalition. So interestingly, the intrusion of the original religious province of moral issues, as it really found its legs in the 80s and started to insinuate itself into the political process.
Do you think that that's the phenomena of, well, let's have these people on board? I mean, they got hundreds of thousands of people. They can deliver votes. That's the first thing. That's the currency of politics. They can deliver votes. But had I been an advisor, I would have said, well, this is fine, but gee, let's remember, they can deliver votes. They can get rid of us, too. But I hear somebody saying, don't worry, we can control them. And that, to me, has always been a fantasy. You can't control the monster. You really can't.
And particularly something as volatile and as emotional as religion, when you introduce, I think, a public morality, immediately you're bringing to the fore, the risk of hypocrisy is great. I mean, you have the Haggards and the Jimmy Swaggarts, and if you're going to walk that, if you're going to talk that talk, you better walk that walk in private and in public. So it raises the bar for personal behavior, I would imagine. You certainly can't cite the Bible if you're going to violate it on a regular basis in your everyday life. So there's a hypocrisy danger. There's the other idea, Christian values. There was a time when it was render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. The city of God, the city of man, St. Augustine, Christians were to be meek and were to, not particularly enjoy their stay on earth. I mean, the idea of political power, is that not anathema to a lot of Christian belief? In other words, is the pursuit of power under the auspices of some Christian organization, does that run counter to the very nature of Christianity? Now there's a lot of Christians who are not active in those, and I don't want to.
Well, that's true.
I don't want to. I'm certainly not going to sit in judgment of the validity on any kind of theological ground. But there's an argument to be made that this level of political involvement by ostensibly religious organizations is something that we may regret.
Well, I think they have come to regret it. I think it has been an annoyance for a lot of people who, being the silent majority, thought, well, they're entitled to their opinion, let them talk. but I think it is their own organizations who are coming to the conclusion we're expending a tremendous amount of our political capital, our moral capital, our good old capital, and we don't seem to be getting what we want. We're getting power, but we're not moving the culture in what we think is the right direction. If anything, they seem to be moving towards what we think of as liberal causes. More people are concerned about the earth. That's not something that you, certainly here in a Baptist ministry, no one talks about those kinds of things. In fact, that's, tree huggery.
Well, I think maybe these organizations find that they're every 4 years they're basically used by the powers that be to accomplish the raising of funds and activating a base for the purpose of winning a nomination on either side.
The perceived culture war. Culture war warrior seems to be possibly nothing more than a control freak. He's certainly a man with a plan, and it's an exclusionary vision. But he seems to me that he diminishes America by steering it. It doesn't let it grow and evolve. I'd like to know, are you really on board for this experiment in a culture war? Are you sure? Experiments can be pretty scary things. Remember, America is an experiment, and just because it's a noble experiment doesn't mean it must succeed. Should we reject this culture war, the two fringes, and reassert a radical center? It's up to you. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email, participate. Remember, government by discussion broke the bond of ages and set free the originality of mankind. I want to thank our guest today, Norman Ball. Norm,
Hey,
thank
Leo,
you for
thanks for
being
having
with
me.
us.
I
I
enjoyed
hope
it.
to see you back again.
Thank you.
I'm Leo Gerard. Point taken.